Hey, I'm Rahul. I'm a third year PhD student in biomedical engineering, and today I'm going to share with you my story of how I ended up in the PhD program. So, the story really starts when I was an undergrad. As an undergrad, I was a BME, so biomedical engineering, pre medical major. And to be honest, I had no idea what I was getting into when I applied for this major. I in high school I kind of just chose the most broad option that would give me the most options coming out of college. And I had this broad idea that I really wanted to become a doctor. And this is actually what I found is very common amongst people in the biomedical engineering circles. But anyway, during my undergraduate years, I did all the typical things you would expect a pre medical student to do. So I did the hospital shadowing, I did research in a lab, and I volunteered. And those are and I got good grades as well. So those are considered like the three or four pillars to a successful med school applicant. That's kind of what I was optimizing for, even though I didn't really know for sure that this is what I wanted to do. So I'll talk about each one of these experiences. So for shadowing, I was really just doing it to check off a box. Looking back, I thought it was really boring, and I know some people enjoy it, and that's great because we need more doctors in the world. But I think it really gives you an idea of what the hospital environment is like, and I honestly didn't quite like it that as much as I thought I would. Volunteering, I honestly just really enjoyed it, and I still do it to this day with the same groups. So that I feel like is a kind of auxiliary point when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I did research, which was one of the biggest aspects to my undergraduate experience. So I really like doing research, but I really think this was because I had very good advisors. I was in a co-advised lab, and the PhD student that I worked with is an amazing person, and we still are in touch today, long after he graduated. But that was honestly like something that made me like research so much more. And another thing that I just was reminded of was the way that I got involved with undergraduate research honestly played a big role in why I actually ended up sticking around to do a PhD. So the way this actually happened was I was taking one of the core biomedical engineering classes, and the class was called I believe there's a programming language called LabVIEW, and it was a class for that programming language. And in that class, it's like a project based class where you have like a team of students, and you have to build something using this programming language and then present it at the end of the year as part of a showcase, or at the end of the quarter as a showcase. And I did the project, and you know how group projects are. I often ended up doing the entire project by myself, but um, I put together a project, honestly, kind of last minute as these things go. And by the time I got to the demo day, the project wasn't working. And I was one of the first people to present the project. And when it didn't work, the professor, he was like, oh, like I'm sorry, like this is nothing I can do. And I was like, wait, give me another chance. Let's actually, I don't even think I asked for it. I was kind of ready to accept defeat, but the professor gave me another chance and said, okay, I'll let you go last out of all the demos. And if you can get it to work by then I'll just grade you normally. So um, I absolutely locked in and went to work on this project. And honestly, it was I like entered that zone that you get when you're working on something that you really like working. You kind of get into this flow state, and I got into that flow state, and it was it was amazing. Like we were able to get the project to work by the time the last group went, which was honestly super clutch. But that was like one of the defining moments that made me like think, okay, this is something that I can do with my life. But anyway, the professor recognized this and invited me to join his lab as part of this co-advised project. And that's how I ended up in the lab that I was in. So I kind of felt like I had the advisor on my side from the very beginning, which honestly, having your PI support is so important, especially as an undergraduate when it's very rare to have that kind of support from your PI. So that was kind of a long tangent, but that's how I got involved with undergraduate research, and that's part of the reason why I liked undergraduate research so much. So let me get back to the main story of why I even ended up doing the PhD. But in my mind at this point, I really enjoyed doing research, but I still had this kind of broad conception that, oh, like, my parents want me to be a doctor, so I should be a doctor too. And I honestly find that this is very common in like Asian households. Um, so I did all the things that you need to do. I got the good grades. I did the research. I did the volunteering. I did the shadowing. And I even applied. And actually, against all advice from my parents and people I knew, I ended up applying for MD PhDs because I really enjoyed doing research and I wanted to keep doing research. And I had this idea, it wasn't very strong at the time, but I had this idea that, way down the line, I would become a professor and run my own lab. But before I can do that, let me become a doctor first. That's kind of the mindset that I had when I was an undergrad. So I applied for the MD PhD school and I interviewed at a few different places and I ended up getting waitlisted at a couple different places. And this time of my life when I was waitlisted was I honestly didn't know what to do with my life. I felt like I was just waiting for this decision to happen. So I honestly kind of started to coast a little bit, like senioritis. This was my 4th year of college. And, this was like, I was a part-time student, just kind of, the only thing I really did at this point in my life was research. So I wasn't, really focusing on other things like gym, eating right, sleeping right, things like that. But eventually, I ended up getting the news that I didn't get off the wait list into any of those programs. And that crushed me. I had no idea what to do with my life because I had this kind of delusional confidence that, oh, like I made it to the wait list, I'll get in. But it just didn't happen. And I talked to different professors that I had, and they're like, oh, like I have no idea why. They're just being nice, But yeah, I was just crushed for the longest time. But looking back at it, like thank God I didn't get in because I'll get into this later, but I genuinely didn't like working in the kind of hospital or direct patient care environment. And I'm sure I probably would have turned out fine. This is a little bit of a cope, but in my mind, I had this vision that I wanted to become a professor running a lab at the end of my career anyway. So I thought, like, why don't I try to just do that now? Why put in all this energy to try to become a doctor just to appease this idea that I had when I was like a kid in high school? It just frankly didn't make sense. It felt like I was doing it for a past version of myself and not for who I was now. But anyway, with this kind of mindset, I graduated from college. So I actually applied during my 3rd year of undergrad. So it would have been like a direct, I forgot, I don't remember the term exactly. It's like a direct admit. So you apply in your 3rd year so that right after your 4th year of college, you can start medical school. So I applied such that it would be like that, so no gap years. But I ended up not getting in during my 4th year. So I kind of I had no idea what to do with my life. So this was like my degenerate phase of life where I was just, trying to escape from from my real life by, partying a lot, things like that. But the only thing that I actually kept doing and that I enjoyed to do was research. I loved working in the lab that I was working in. So this gave me a little bit of guidance. So when I didn't get in, I asked my advisors, like, hey, I graduated, but can I still keep working in the lab? Because, I don't really have anything set up. So they were thankfully, were able to pull some strings and get me into the master's program at my school. And I was like, this is, something I could do to hold me over. But the master's program is very expensive, and like my parents weren't gonna support me for this, right? So I had to pay for it, and it was very expensive. So I had to get an additional job as a medical scribe. Probably something that I should have done in undergrad as a pre-med, but I got a job as a medical scribe. I still had this maybe there's an off chance that I'd reapply again for the MD PhD. And that still wasn't enough. So I actually also got an internship at a medical device company because, I still had the BME degree, but I was able to get an internship all while doing the master's degree. So essentially, I was working 3 different jobs. I was working in the hospital. I was working in the emergency room, mostly doing night shifts. I was, taking my classes for the master's and still working in the lab. And I was pretty much working a 9 to 5 internship. So I would work 9 to 5. Right after work, I'd go to the lab. And then after the lab, I'd have like a night shift in the night, and then I'd repeat. So basically no sleep. This was honestly the most miserable time of my life. And the reason for that is not because I was working too hard. Like, I have no problems working. I love working hard. The problem is that I had no direction. And I was using all of my energy, but I wasn't making any progress anywhere in my life. And that was so frustrating to me. So in fact, my progress in each of those spheres actually decreased because I was trying to pull myself in so many different directions. And there were so many instances where I'd have to do something in the lab, but I was at work, so I'd have to move things around. It was a very high stress environment all the time. And honestly, I would never wish this on anyone. Do not work 3 jobs while trying to get your master's degree. Just if you can afford it, then just focus on that one thing at a time. So yeah, my lab progress, it dipped, and I ended up kind of messing up my relationship that I had with my PIs. We started off with a great relationship, and then this is kind of just how the lab environment works, right? If you work for somebody and you stop meeting expectations, your relationship with them is probably gonna get worse, and that's exactly what happened to me. So this led to a rough patch in our relationship until I finally talked to them about it after 2 whole quarters of me juggling 3 different jobs. So 2 quarters is 20 weeks, approximately 6 months of this. And I talked to my PIs and they were like, okay, we're gonna give you a shot, which thank God I had at least had a foundation of a good relationship for them. So they had some level of trust in me. So they gave me a shot to be on GSR, that's what it's called. So be a paid master student. So I would get a stipend. Basically, I would be paid just the same as a PhD student, but I would still be a master student for a quarter. And it was like a trial run. If you can prove that you're worth it, then we'll keep paying you. And if not, then we won't. So they gave me the shot, and that led me to really sit and reflect, because the kind of getting that shot had the stipulation of that I would quit the extra 2 other jobs that I was doing. So I had to really reflect and think what really was important to me. And the things at this time that were really important to me were, I wanted to be using my mind for my work. So I'd have to be I wanted to have a job where I had to think. And I really, my job as an emergency room scribe made me hate the hospital. Not hate it, but I didn't like working in the hospital setting. I mean, obviously part of this is the fact that I was working night shifts and I was very stressed during this time, but I was very disillusioned by the fact that I would keep seeing the same patients over and over and over again. I was working in an overdose hotspot. So what would happen is people would shoot up on drugs. They would be brought in by the police to the emergency room, and then we would treat them, or the doctor would treat them, and I would scribe, and then they would be discharged, and then they'd shoot up again, and they'd be brought back, and we'd have this cycle over and over and over again. And that kind of made me disillusioned with the whole process. I was thinking, I want no part of this. But anyway, that's just my one experience with that job. But anyway, I enjoyed working in the lab a lot. And I had this idea that after my career was all said and done, I wanted to be remembered as a professor with a lab at a university. And I figured, why not just go for that to start with? And the best way to do that is to get my PhD. So I had this idea that I would eventually get a PhD, but I was still a master's student, right? I was nearing the end of my first year as the master's student. So for the first time in my life, I had clear direction on what I was doing. I was in the master's program, and I finally started making progress because I was focused. I had direction in my life. I made a lot of progress towards my first publication. You know, things started to work. Things that didn't work previously, I just had time to like think about it and really troubleshoot things properly, like an actual grad student, and then things started to work. And I stayed in this kind of paid master student position for another few quarters. And that's when, the idea of like PhD applications came up. And I had to decide between staying in my current lab. So there's an option to actually switch from the master's to the PhD program, or I could have graduated and start my PhD elsewhere. So those were the two options that I had. And I was weighing the pros and cons. So for example, the pros of graduating and starting somewhere else would be, it'd be nicer on my resume to have a master's thesis. I could get experience from a variety of different labs, and I had the potential to go to maybe a better university. The cons of that were I would have to start my PhD after I finished the master's, right? So it'd be another 5 years after the additional year to finish up the master's degree, right? So for master's plus PhD, it would have been like maybe 7+ years, depending on, how things went. And on the other side was staying. And the pros of that was my master's work would have counted towards the PhD. So it would have only been an additional 2 to 3 years of the PhD, which was very appealing to me. And even though I kind of wanted to move somewhere else and kind of start something new, I was willing to make that sacrifice to graduate faster and get to my dream career faster. But before I made that decision, I actually first applied to the PhD programs because I didn't have to make that decision until the PhD decisions came out. And there was a couple things that I had to do. I actually had to take the preliminary exam that all the PhD students take. I had to take that as a prerequisite to enable the process to switch. And then I had to submit an application to the PhD program. And that PhD application was probably the hardest I've ever worked. Maybe not the hardest I've ever, but at the time it was the hardest I've ever worked on anything. And I used all my resources. So definitely if you're applying for PhDs, I would recommend this. Use the writing center at your university. They have really good resources to help you write application materials. And I had many people read over my applications, draft over draft over draft. And I had my PIs read over them as well. And when the decisions came through, and I actually had some time to think about it, that's when I made the realization that staying and finishing my PhD earlier would be the best option for me, and I could make faster progress in my career path. And there was like this whole thing where my PIs kind of made a sales pitch on why you should stay, and that honestly, having my PIs kind of like advocate and kind of say like, hey, we want you to stay, made me feel a lot better about staying as well, because I knew how important the relationship between the student and the PI is. And like the fact that they were willing to kind of fight to have me in the lab was a really good sign for me to stay in the lab and graduate with the current work that I was doing. And also, I was really excited about the future directions that I could take my research. So it kind of was a win-win for me. But anyway, uh, that was about a couple years ago, I think. So now the rest is history. I'm a PhD student at the same school I did my undergrad and technically master's at. But that is my unconventional story of how I started my PhD. And now here I am, and I'm loving it.